Hello Story Store listeners. If you guys like this story, please subscribe to Story Store and hit the bell icon. Thank you. The blinding stage lights hit his face as the crowd erupted into deafening applause. Carl stood frozen, clutching the microphone as his heart hammered in his chest. Beside him, a scruffy golden retriever wagged its tail and barked cheerfully, oblivious to the emotional weight of the moment. A tall man in a crisp suit stepped forward, smiling warmly. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the man and the dog who reminded us all what true compassion looks like. Carl's throat tightened. He had spent most of his life being invisible, mopping floors and emptying trash cans. Yet here he was, center stage. As the spotlight bore down on him, his mind reeled back to that fateful night, the night everything changed. 3 months earlier, Carl pushed his squeaky janitor's cart into the supply closet at the end of another long shift. The office building was quiet now, the hum of fluorescent lights his only company. Invisible as always, he thought. Just another thankless day of cleaning up after people who barely noticed him. As he stepped outside into the cold alley behind the building, pulling his frayed jacket tighter around him, a faint sound stopped him in his tracks. A whimper, soft, pitiful, and desperate. Carl paused, his breath visible in the chilly air. "Hello," he called into the shadows, his voice echoing off the brick walls. The sound came again, sharper this time. He followed it to a corner where a torn cardboard box sat under a flickering streetlight. Inside, a scruffy golden retriever cowered, its ribs showing through matted fur. A frayed rope cut into its neck, and its wide amber eyes were filled with fear. "Oh, no," Carl whispered, his chest tightening. He crouched down, moving slowly. "Hey, buddy, it's okay, I won't hurt you." The dog flinched as his hand neared, but after a moment it sniffed him and gave a tentative lick. Carl smiled. "You're coming home with me," he said, gently lifting the trembling dog into his arms. Carl named the dog Lucky, though he often joked that the name fit better the other way around. Lucky brought an unexpected warmth into Carl's quiet, lonely life. The dog followed him everywhere, his wagging tail and soft amber eyes filling the empty spaces Carl had grown so used to. From the moment Lucky stepped into the tiny apartment, it was clear he wasn't just a pet, he was a companion. One cool evening, Carl and Lucky were walking through the park, their usual quiet routine. Lucky trotted happily beside him, his tail wagging as they passed joggers and families. As they neared the playground, a piercing scream shattered the calm. "Somebody! My daughter's having a seizure! Help!" a woman cried out, clutching a little girl convulsing on the ground. People froze, unsure of what to do. Carl's heart raced as he looked at the frightened crowd. But before he could act, Lucky sprang into motion. "Lucky, wait!" Carl called, but the dog was already at the girl's side. He lay down beside her, nudging her gently with his nose and licking her hand. His calm presence seemed to ground the child, her convulsions slowing as her breathing steadied. The crowd watched in awe as the dog stayed by her side, his warm amber eyes fixed on her. The paramedics arrived moments later, taking over as the mother sobbed with relief. She hugged Carl and Lucky tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Your dog saved my little girl's life." Carl looked down at Lucky, who wagged his tail as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Carl knew better. Carl had no idea someone in the park had recorded the entire scene. The video, showing Lucky's calm demeanor and his heroic actions, was uploaded online and quickly went viral. Within days, millions had seen Lucky comforting the little girl, and Carl's quiet life was thrust into an unfamiliar spotlight. Reporters began calling, and Carl found strangers stopping him on the street to thank him and Lucky. While the attention felt overwhelming at first, Carl noticed something remarkable. People were sharing their own stories of acts of kindness, inspired by Lucky's actions. One evening, Carl scrolled through his phone, reading comments under the video. "This dog reminds me of what the world needs more of," one person wrote. Another said, "Lucky's compassion has restored my faith in humanity." Carl realized that Lucky wasn't just a hero, he had become a symbol of hope. Offers started pouring in, from interviews to speaking engagements, but Carl stayed grounded. He knew this wasn't about fame. It was about sharing the simple yet profound message Lucky had taught him. A single act of kindness could ripple outward in ways he'd never imagined. Carl's life began to shift as invitations to various events started to arrive. Schools, hospitals, and charity fundraisers all eager to meet him and Lucky. It seemed that Lucky's calming presence was having a profound effect on those around him, especially in children's hospitals. The sight of sick kids finding comfort and joy in the soft fur of the dog had become a heartwarming scene. One afternoon, while Carl and Lucky were visiting a local clinic, a representative from a national animal welfare organization approached Carl. "We'd love for you and Lucky to be the faces of our new campaign," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "Your story has inspired so many people." Carl, still adjusting to the attention, hesitated. "I'm just a janitor," he said, his voice filled with modesty. The woman smiled kindly. "Not anymore," she said. "You're more than just a janitor. You're a symbol of compassion, of what kindness can do to heal and inspire." Carl looked down at Lucky, who sat beside him, tail wagging gently. For the first time, Carl began to see himself not just as a janitor, but as someone who could make a real difference in the world. As Carl's fame soared, the weight of attention grew heavy. Every event, every public appearance made him feel like he was losing himself, becoming just another spectacle. He began to fear that people only saw him as a novelty, something to admire for a fleeting moment, not as a person with real emotions. One evening, after a tiring day filled with interviews and photo ops, Carl found himself alone in his apartment. His body ached, and his mind swirled with doubts. He sat on the floor, head in his hands, feeling the loneliness that came with his fame. Lucky, as always, was there by his side, the steady presence he could always rely on. The dog nudged Carl's hand, offering silent comfort. As Carl gazed down at Lucky's trusting eyes, a wave of reassurance washed over him. He had always been there for Lucky, and in that moment Lucky was returning the favor. Carl spoke softly. "I don't know if I can keep doing this." But as Lucky gazed up at him, Carl found the courage to continue. "If you can keep going, so can I," he whispered, wiping away a tear. With Lucky by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. Months later, Carl and Lucky found themselves on a national stage, invited to receive the prestigious National Compassion Award. The ceremony buzzed with excitement as cameras flashed, microphones were thrust toward them, and the audience's eyes were all on them. The janitor and his dog, an unlikely duo that had captured hearts across the country. Carl stood backstage, his hands trembling as he prepared to step into the spotlight. He had never imagined such recognition. But here he was, about to speak in front of a crowd that saw him not as a janitor, but as someone who had made a difference. As Carl walked to the podium, the weight of the moment almost overwhelmed him. He looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar from the media, others strangers who had heard his story. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice cracking slightly as he shared the journey that had brought him here. "I've spent most of my life feeling invisible," Carl said, his voice steadying. "But Lucky taught me that kindness, no matter how small, can make you visible to the world. he saved me as much as I saved him." His words hung in the air as the crowd applauded, a reminder of how far they had come together. The recognition from the National Compassion Award was only the beginning for Carl and Lucky. In the months that followed, they set out on a new mission, one of hope and healing. They traveled across the country, visiting shelters to help abandoned animals find homes, speaking at schools to teach children the value of empathy, and visiting hospitals to brighten the lives of those who needed it most. Carl, once a lonely janitor in the shadows of the world, had found a purpose that gave him strength. His life was no longer defined by the dull routine of cleaning hallways and empty offices. It was now a life of meaning, where every day brought new opportunities to make a difference. Through it all, Lucky was by his side, a constant reminder of the bond they shared. The dog, who had been discarded, much like Carl had once felt, had become the symbol of everything Carl stood for: resilience, love, and compassion. Together, they proved that even in the darkest moments, with kindness, a brighter path could always be found.